What's up, everybody? Welcome back to BPA. This is the best podcast available, the Athlon Sports NFL Draft Show. I'm Luke Easterling, here to take you around the NFL draft world. Obviously, the dust is finally settling. We're chilling a little bit. When this comes out, it's going to be more, NFL schedule release day, so we're going to be looking forward a little bit to the 2025 season. But there's still plenty to talk about around the draft itself as we look ahead to the upcoming campaign. We're going to sit down today in the interview room with Mike Renner from CBS Sports, who's going to talk to us about his favorite sleeper picks in this draft, prospects that he just absolutely loved, no matter where they landed, or guys that, because of the teams they landed with, ended up in a great spot to be able to have a big impact, especially relative to their draft slot. So stick around for that. Great conversation with Mike about the sleepers. You know where we start. We start at the top of the board. We got a couple of big storylines in the draft world to talk about. I know we touched on the Saints quarterback situation a little bit last week. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into that here, but let's go there without any further ado. Here's the top of the board. All right, so the big, domino that I guess fell in the NFL world this week was the retirement of Derek Carr, veteran quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. And again, you've heard me talk about it on this show before, where his health or presence, no offense to Derek, I don't really think should have impacted the Saints draft plans. I said it before the draft. I said it after they took Tyler Shuck in the top 40. Whether Derek Carr was healthy or not, the way he has played, even when healthy in New Orleans, was just never at the level of the contract they signed him to. And so now that he is not going to be in that room, you look at a room that's got Spencer Rattler, who was a 5th round pick last year. You got Jake Hayner, late round UDFA type of talent that's just going to kind of be on the roster. He's had some snaps because of the injuries they had at the quarterback position. But I don't think has shown anything that obviously, would have prevented the Saints from taking a quarterback in the top 40, which they did in Tyler Shuck. But now it's a weird situation for the Saints, because from a team building perspective, you're looking at a franchise that we've just been waiting for like a decade for them to finally blow it up. They've been kicking the can down the road, as we like to say, about the salary cap situation and just pushing money down the road, restructuring contracts with their veteran guys. And just we're waiting for that opportunity for them to raise it to the ground, to start over, and to eat all that dead cap money, and then they can finally rebuild and move forward. And it felt like with a changing of the guard at head coach, Kellen Moore comes in, Dennis Allen's out, which he is kind of an extension of the previous regime under Sean Payton. And you look at a roster that just needs everywhere, right? I mean, even some of their best players, guys like Alvin Kamara, who's later in his career, Chris Olave is coming off a serious head injury, so you're hopeful he's able to stay healthy. Cam Jordan on the defensive side of the ball, obviously at the end of his career. DeMario Davis getting up there as one of the older, veteran linebackers in the league. Marshawn Lattimore got traded away last year. And so that defense, Tyrann Mathieu, again, all these aging veteran guys, and you're looking at the opportunity for this team to say, okay, regardless of what happens with Derek Carr, but now especially because he's not going to be involved, you're looking at a team that just is ripe for rebuild. Like this team, I think the last, or consensus Super Bowl odds that I saw had them, as the lowest odds to win the Super Bowl, which is you're in the maybe number 1 overall pick type of range. And so it just made no sense to me for a team in that situation to burn a top 40 pick on a guy like Tyler Shuck, really any quarterback, but especially a quarterback who's going to be a 26-year-old rookie who missed multiple seasons in college with serious injuries. And he's coming in. He's a guy that struggles under pressure, and he's not terribly mobile. And so there's so many things about him as a prospect that made it questionable to spend a top 40 pick on him in general. I had a 4th round grade on him. And so even just in a vacuum, I thought any team taking him in the top 40 would have been a reach. But specifically for a team in the Saints who they have so many needs elsewhere that top 40 pick could have been spent on. Defensive line anywhere, another a corner, a receiver to help in case, guard against the recovery and return of Olave and give them an upgrade at best if he needs a number 2 over Rashid Shaheed and the rest of that room. A top running back to replace Kamara when he moves on. More offensive line help. I know they spent a top 10 pick on Kelvin Banks, but so many ways in which you could use that top 40 pick. And instead, you take it on a quarterback who's going to be 30 years old when he signs his second contract, who has struggled to stay healthy, who made a late move up the board, as we like to say, usually because coaches get involved. So maybe it is just a matter of Kellen Moore getting in the room with Tyler Shuck and saying, hey, that's my guy. But for a team that might be picking in the top 5, might be picking number 1 overall next year in a quarterback class where, again, who knows if Arch Manning's going to declare or not. I would assume if the Saints of all teams, if he's still planning to come back to school next year regardless, and the Saints end up with the number 1 pick, I think being the number one overall pick to his grandfather's team, I think would be the maybe only scenario that gets Arch Manning to change his mind and declare for next year's draft. So I feel like, but if you look at the rest of that quarterback class, I still think more questions than answers. But would anybody be shocked if Drew Aller takes the step forward and becomes that type of quarterback? Lenora Sellers is the guy I'm really excited about out of South Carolina, but you got Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, in-state prospect. You got Cade Klubnik from Clemson, who had made huge strides last year. There's so many talented quarterbacks that I think could rise to that level and end up in that conversation, that I feel like if the Saints are as bad as a lot of people think they will be, and they end up picking in the top 5 next year, and you're you find yourself with that opportunity to take that type of quarterback, and you just burnt a top 40 pick on a quarterback that now you're replacing again, because you can get a guy that has the physical tools, has the upside, doesn't have the injury history, and he's 21 years old. He's 22 instead of going to be 26, 27, which is what Tyler Shuck will be this time next year. It's just, from a team building standpoint, I just don't understand it. I think a lot of Saints fans probably don't understand it either. They think this was a perfect opportunity to fill all of those other needs as much as possible. Spend as many of those top 100 picks on guys that can make an immediate impact for your team on either side of the ball at multiple other positions, and avoid reaching for a quarterback in a lackluster quarterback class, and especially reaching for the guy who's 26 years old and has such an injury history. I think it's a questionable decision at best for the Saints, and now, especially in light of Derek Carr's retirement, makes it look that much worse, I think. So, I think the rest of the NFC South isn't shedding a tear over this, but for Saints fans, it's just it's going to, I think, be a tough pill to swallow if they end up picking super high next year. The other thing I think was interesting in the draft world this year is I'm a big fan of like uniform updates and news, and I'm super snobby when it comes to uniforms. But jersey numbers, I'm a huge jersey number snob as well, and judging by the reaction every year when the rookie jersey numbers come out, they're not even final, by the way. Like, they never finalize these things until after the final roster cuts, after the preseason is over. And so the strong reaction every time the teams finally release. And if it's your team, you're always waiting. If like you're one of the last teams to release your rookie jersey numbers, everybody's like, come on, like, when's it coming? The Bucs were one of the last teams to do it this year. And all the Bucs fans were just like, what are we doing? What's going to happen? But man, go look at some of the rookies when their numbers came out. Mason Taylor for the Jets was the best example, where it comes out that Mason Taylor, second round pick, tight end out of LSU, is going to wear number 46 when he gets to rookie camp. And everybody's just like, oh, well, that's the end of his career. That's over. Like, just because of the ugly jersey number, like, now we can't. It's just terrible. It's terrible news. And I think within a matter of 24 to 48 hours, he was wearing 85, like a regular tight end number that actually looks halfway decent. So it was just so funny. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the backlash. I'm sure just something popped open and it was available or something. But man, it was just so funny to see everybody just immediately like decry, like full thumbs down to that jersey decision, and then have it changed in a matter of hours. And then Luther Burden III, the wide receiver from the Bears, ended up with number 87, which isn't a bad wide receiver number. It's fine. But like, for specifically, it feels like a number that goes to like a big physical, like Muhsin Muhammad wore 87. He did it for the Bears too, I believe. And so you're thinking that type of big physical receiver. It was Gronk's number, like even for a tight end. But like Luther Burden III is like a sub 6 foot, like, slot receiver, after the catch, explosive weapon type of guy. And so seeing like a guy like that in 87, when he wore number 3 at Missouri, which is like the perfect number. But they asked him about it at his press conference during rookie minicamp, and he was just brutally honest. He's like, guys, all the good numbers were taken. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, I only had so many to pick from. So we do have to have a little bit of understanding that these players are aware a good bit of the time that they got stuck with an ugly number or a number they wouldn't prefer, but they're going to bide their time. They're going to wait until after those roster cuts. Obviously those single digits go pretty quickly. But more often than not, those players are going to do their best to get into a much more aesthetically pleasing jersey number than 46 or 87 for those guys. It's just funny to see them kind of have similar reactions to a lot of the fans, and know that it doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. But hey, look good, feel good, play good, right? And I think that's what's going to happen when these guys end up with some better jersey numbers. All right, welcome to the interview room here at the best podcast available. This is the Athlon Sports NFL Draft Show, and I am thrilled to be joined by Mike Renner, CBS Sports, covers all kinds of fantastic draft nuggets for them, and we're going to talk sleepers today. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a minute or two since we've shared a beverage at some dodgy bar in Mobile. But we'll renew our sentiments here by talking about the guys that'll, maybe not steal the headlines on draft weekend, but the guys who, because of either where they landed or kind of how you feel about them as prospects and how they should have gone earlier, or whatever, whatever you count as a sleeper, or whatever you define that as. I'm excited to get your guys here. But how do you view that term, like as you go through the process? Who counts as a sleeper for you?
It's tough. People love to police the term. Like diehard college football fans, they want it to be someone that like truly have never heard of. And those guys usually they end up being UDFAs or like seventh rounders at best.
Right.
So to me, it's more just a sleeper is someone that, like when I talk about sleepers, is someone's probably day three pick. Someone
Right.
who would be a big surprise to not go on day three, but that on my board or like I probably have closer to a top 75. Like that to
Yeah.
me is a sleeper. Someone that's going to go day three that you would say where he goes, he is going to outplay that wholesale. That to me is what I like to talk about when I talk about sleepers. Because if you're just naming guys who are like way off the beaten path who are going to get drafted, but like aren't going to go to bat for them being good in the NFL, well, then you're kind of just,
Right.
sure it's a sleeper, but it's like if you're not willing to go to bat for them being good, if you're still saying they should have been a seventh round pick, then what good is that to me as someone in the public?
Yeah, that's always like I always kind of put them in two buckets. I kind of touched on it earlier, where it's like it's guys like just prospects that I fell in love with through the process, and probably knew they weren't going to go as early as I would take them, but like wherever they land, I don't care where it is. Like I'm going to be like, okay, that guy's going to do super super well. And then it's other guys where it's like I may not have even been like super high on them as prospects, but because of the situation they landed in, whether it's scheme or depth chart or whatever, the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
presented to them for in terms of those variables, it's like, okay, now I'm in. Like now I think that guy who went, fourth round that maybe a lot of other people had as a day two guy or vice versa, now I'm in. Like now I think they could kind of rise above the draft slot there. So I think you got a list of 5 guys. I asked you to come up with a few that you consider sleepers. So let's start at the top of your board. Who's your first sleeper pick out of this class?
The one guy who's I've gone to bat for all draft season, who I thought also landed in a great spot, is David Walker, Central Arkansas defensive end, goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the fourth
I was gonna say
round.
you're talking to a Bucks guy. You're gonna get me fired up right here off the bat. You know how to make an appearance. I like this.
Dude, I just don't see how he doesn't become at least a guy who can make an impact at the NFL level. When you have his skill set, which is, he's very short. He is a low center of gravity sort of player. He's almost built like a defensive tackle or a running back.
Yeah.
He's 6 foot, 263 to 200, mid 260s. That is, 263 is a big defensive end to begin with. That's
Right.
more of a power guy. But when you're 6 foot tall, your body is closer to a lot of defensive tackles in the NFL. And with that, he still ran a sub 4.740. So his get off at that size, and you give him a full head of steam. And I didn't see anyone on tape at the FCS level be able to hold up to his bull rush, to his power. I didn't see anyone on tape when he went to the bull rush at the Senior Bowl be able to hold up to it. I mean, he hit Anthony Belton, NC State offensive tackle, 345 pounds he weighed in at Senior Bowl, just like running backwards. So I feel confident that he's going to be able to at least do that a little bit at the NFL level. Maybe he's only a situational rusher. Maybe he's only a third down guy at his size. But in that mold, that guy's still making an impact on an NFL football field.
I don't know if you saw the video the Bucks posted, like a draft room video of after they took him. Larry Foote, who's moving back to the outside linebackers, he's going to coach the outside linebackers again for the Bucks this year. His reaction to that pick was like he was so jacked,
Oh,
and like I think
love it.
every Bucks fan, especially if like draft adjacent draft, Bucks people are super stoked about it. I'm not a big pro comp guy, but like he screams Melvin Ingram to me. Like that's just that type of kind of squatty two pass rushers in a trench coat but sideways kind
Yes.
of frame to him. But man, the tape is just, and again, if I trust one GM in this league to hang his hat on a small school guy, it's the guy who drafted Ali Marpet in the second round, the guy who drafted Cody Mauch in the second round, the guy who found Alex Kappa in the third round, who was a solid guard for them throughout their Super Bowl run. Jason Light knows what he's doing with these small school guys, and I think he trusts his coaching staff to develop them. I think Larry Foote, not to get too deep in the Bucs side of it, but Larry Foote moving back to outside linebackers, I think is going to be huge for them. He coached them in that 2020 season too, moved back to inside linebackers, which is weird because Larry Foote was an inside linebacker as a player. But I'm all that to say, I'm super on board as a Bucs fan with David Walker there in the 4th round. I think the Bucs picks were so interesting because I think they got so many guys that like they would have happily taken a round before. Like I think the Bucs would have taken David Walker in the 3rd, but Jacob Parrish was still there, who I think they would have taken in the 2nd. I think they feel the same way about Elijah Roberts, who they got in the 5th. But I'm sold. I'm sold on David Walker. Who's next on the list?
Next on the list, I'll say defensive line because I love Aeneas Peebles. He's in a similar-ish mold in that he's on the shorter side, but he's got an elite first step. I mean, you saw it again at the Senior Bowl. He tested well at the Combine. He is definitely undersized, but I think he goes to a Ravens defensive line where it's going to be put to good use. That first step, he's obviously doesn't have to be a starter. He can be a rotational guy. He can be a 3rd down guy, pass down guy. And in that role on those downs, I think he could be massively impactful. I just see you just can't coach that ability, that get off that he has. And I think he already has some pass rushing moves, whether it was, on tape this past year, Virginia Tech, and he was productive at Duke as well before that. So he's a guy that 6th rounder. I'm never expecting him to be a starter, but if you can stockpile those guys in your tier 2 and your 2nd wave of defensive linemen on the interior, you'll have a darn good defensive line. So I think it's a great value pick at that point in the draft. And another guy where he'll make an impact. He's day 3, 6th round. Usually if you get anything out of those guys, I think you'll definitely get something out of Aeneas Peebles.
Yeah, I had a 4th on him, man. I every year when I do my overall like initial grades, like right after the whole draft, where I look at each team's entire class, I always give like the biggest steal of the class, where it's I take where the slot was and I take where they were on my board, and whatever pick that team had that kind of had the biggest gap between where they got that player who was higher on my board than they got him, and that was the Ravens pick. It was Peebles because there was such a massive gap between where they got him in the 6th, and like you said, there was kind of a logjam of interior guys in that range that I felt like I was a little higher on than the league, right? And Peebles was one of them where like anytime after day 2, I would have been super happy to land him. But to for anybody to get him, but particularly Baltimore, who again already has a solid defensive front, they're going to be able to rotate him in and won't need him to be earth shattering, especially earlier in his career. But if you get high quality rotational play out of a 6th round pick at any position, but especially when you need those fresh guys, especially late in games, late in the season, they're going to be really happy to have him on their team, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And the situation, again, the Ravens, with how they utilize that defensive line, I think could not have been better for him.
Yeah, I agree. All right, number 3, who it is?
I'm going to go to the 7th round now. I picked 4th, 6th. We're going to do 7th round. I got 2 7th rounders and then UDFA. So my 7th rounder, I'm going to go first, Hunter Waller, the safety out of Wisconsin, going to the Indianapolis Colts. Now, I'm not sure this is a great spot for him in terms of like immediate playing time, but it could be depending on, how they shake out this cornerback room. They obviously have a ton of talent that they brought in this offseason. But to me, he is the perfect kind of dime safety for Lou Anarumo's defense. He's that box guy who I think a lot of people just thought was a bad athlete. We don't have to say why, but he goes and has a 9.55 RAS. Like he was actually tested out as a very good athlete. And when I watch his tape, even going back to the year prior, I just think he knows how to play football. I think he's got, great instincts. He's a good tackler. He doesn't make a lot of big mistakes. And while he doesn't have like any elite athletic traits, I think he's just very smooth and solid across the board. His game reminds me a lot of Evan Williams last year, who obviously goes in the 4th, outplays that right out the gate, earns a starting spot. I'm not going to go all the way to that for Hunter Waller, but I think he at least locks down a roster spot as a 7th rounder and could be much more than that in time.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned those like RAS scores and how we get like even for whatever reason you can look at film, and I think there are guys that when you see like really polished technique, or when you see like production and experience, and some of those things are kind of like on the other end of the spectrum from the athletic traits, where we usually have to pick one or the other, right? It's usually we can get like the highly productive, really experienced guy, or we can get the guy with like the super high end traits, the Shamar Stewart, like the boomer bust type guy, but there's going to be some risk attached. But there was guys even early in this draft, like I feel like Armand Membu was a guy who everybody was like, oh, he's really experienced right tackle. He's good. He's polished. But like, I don't know how good of an athlete he is. He goes to the combine and he's like, I'm a world-class athlete. Thank you very much. Donovan Ezuraku, very similar in the like, oh yeah, he's got the production. Oh yeah, he's got the polish and the technique and he's great pass rushing plan. But how good of an athlete is he really? And he goes to the combine, you see the RAS and you're like, oh, he's actually a really damn good athlete. And so Wooler, I think, is again one of those guys where like you watch, I don't know, for like you said, there are a million reasons why you could think that after watching the film, but like then you look at the numbers, you can't really argue with the fact that the guy's just a really good athlete. And again, that when I'm looking at, especially in the 7th round, there's two buckets that I think of. If I were running a team, I would think that 7th round is about where can you make an immediate impact, and I immediately look at special teams. Whether you're talking about kickers or punters, you're talking about guys that can play all of those core, units. And that's where you're going to find a lot of linebackers. You're going to find a lot of safeties. You're going to need receivers who can be gunners and things like that. And so I look for guys who can make an immediate impact. And I look for, the upside, the athletic traits. I'm just going to take a flyer on somebody that if he hits and we can figure out what to do with those tools, the ceiling can be fantastic. And anything you get out of a 7th round pick is super happy. So I feel like with Wooler, you almost check both of those boxes because the athleticism, the numbers tell you he's a great athlete. And I do think he can make an immediate impact on all those core teams as well.
Yes, 100%. That's why I would be surprised if he doesn't make that roster. Obviously, 7th round is not guaranteed, but just from that perspective, from special teams perspective, he's going to be a value add there. But also, I just think, again, for Lou Anarumo and the versatility he kind of requires out of his safeties, I think he can be that guy, especially box slot, that sort of versatility.
That's the next level, right? When you check the first 2 boxes, you're like, man, I actually think there's a path for this guy to get on the field on defense and like make an impact on that side of the ball and push for that right away. You getting that out of a 7th round pick? That's a big win. All right, no, down to 2 more. We got number 2 on your list. Who's your number 2 sleeper?
Number 2 sleeper, I'm going to go with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt out of Arizona, the running back.
What a landing spot.
To the Washington Commanders. Yes, it's a great landing spot because he's going to a spot where they just don't have a speed back, right? Austin Eckler at one point was. At no point now is a speed back. But then you got Brian Robinson Jr., you got Chris Rodriguez. You got slow dudes. You have no one with juice. And like, obviously, when you have Jane Daniels, you want someone with juice next to him. And Krosky-Merritt, his pro day, he ran like low 4.4s, over 40-inch vertical. It doesn't take more than a few reps on tape to know that he's got high-end juice. So I loved his tape in the one game we saw at Arizona. Obviously, it was one game. He had eligibility issues, didn't get back on the field after that. Then Hula Bowl and Shrine Bowl, he was the best player on both those fields. He won Shrine Bowl MVP. So the guy has real talent. He just didn't really get to showcase it. And I love backs or just like players in general that he came to school, I believe. He started at, I want to say, Alabama A&M. He was like 170 pounds. And now he's 210. And it's that's like what it takes, right? To go from a 0 2-star recruit, whatever he was, small school guy, to now a big time athlete. There's no telling what 40 pounds of muscle and a weight room at the collegiate level can do to your body and what kind of athlete you're going to become. And that's what I watched his tape, even from New Mexico, where he was prior to Arizona. I'm like, dude, he's added even more muscle. So I'm very impressed with his trajectory. And if that just continues at the NFL level, I think he's going to start getting some touches for the Commanders.
Yeah, when I started doing my like deeper mocks with going like 3-4 rounds, the guy that I always ended up trying to land in Washington was Bashal Tutin, because I just thought that's the juice they needed. And so when they didn't get him and it got into the later rounds, I was like, all right, that's fine. But then they took Krosky-Merritt and I was like, oh, there we go. Now like that's the same exact type of play that you want for that role. And like you said, like, there's a million different reasons why these guys are still on the board that long. He's got a unique situation in terms of why he wasn't on the field last year, but that's what accounts for this gap in like, okay, there's a certain level of, we don't know what we're getting. But if you do look at what we do have, the evidence we do have, man, I think if he plays last season, I don't think he gets anywhere near the 7th round. I think he's definitely in that, Bashal Tutin was an early 4th round pick, but I think we're definitely having much more of that conversation than we are. And it's not, again, we're not talking about a guy with character off the field issues. We're not talking about a guy who's got like some serious, he's not coming back from an Achilles or something. Like there's a path in which we realize like, oh damn, this guy should have come off the board way earlier. And if we had that film, it probably would have happened. He's still the same player. Like you said, he's shown the progression in terms of the ability to build his body. got the NFL frame, and with that kind of juice, like you said, in that offense in particular, you don't think Cliff Kingsbury is going to find a way to maximize what that guy brings to the table and how he fits in that room, and being able to be in a backfield with Jaden Daniels. I feel like the running back is always at such an advantage when you're lined up next to a quarterback like that, because they've got to account for him to the extent that you're going to have more room to work with when you take the ball than a lot of other guys will end up with.
Yeah, I do think that he's in a prime spot. It truly is. Like, couldn't have gone to a better landing spot for him to produce.
I love it, man. All right, who's the last one? I don't know if this is number 5 or number 1. I'm not sure which direction we went, or if there's no ranking system involved here. But who's last on your list here?
Well, we're just going back in the draft, and this guy's didn't get drafted at all. But I think he has a very good shot of making this roster. And I think, should injuries happen, which they signed a bunch of injured guys this past offseason, he could very well hit the field. And it's Logan Brown, the Kansas offensive tackle, to the Minnesota Vikings as UDFA. There's reasons why he was UDFA that weren't football related, right? He got kicked out of Wisconsin. He had a major foot injury in 2023, has played fewer than, I believe, 1,000 snaps his entire collegiate career. So only 1 year as a starter. There was a lot of whatever around him that you don't necessarily want in a prospect. A lot of red flags, and he's 24 years old. So all that aside, the guy's tape is good. His tape was top 100 tape, in my opinion. I thought he moves exceptionally well. I mean, he's a former 5-star recruit. Yeah. His athleticism, his tools have never been in question. One of the best testing athletes in this draft class. I just watch him on tape, and the posture he plays with in his sets and his hand usage is refined for a guy who really hasn't played a lot of football. So I think he has guard or tackle versatility at his body type. I just was very impressed with what he could be. And now, again, I don't know anything about the guy. I don't know why he got kicked out of Wisconsin. Those details haven't been made public. And if he goes to UDFA with that tape, it probably wasn't a great reason why he got kicked out. Not that there's a lot of good reasons why someone would get kicked out. But I just think Minnesota Vikings is a team that desperately needs offensive line help. They invested so much this offseason, completely overhauled their interior. But you just look at their second string now. They did a lot just to get the first string. Their second strings are brutal at this point in time. So if anyone goes down, and they had some injuries last year, and they brought in guys who were both injured, Ryan Kelly and Will Fries, that I think Logan Brown's a guy who could step in early for them.
It's so funny. We make fun of that draft day movie so much for being just as awesomely bad as it is. And there is one quote that Kevin Costner says in there that definitely does not happen on the clock, like in the middle of the draft in the first round. You don't actually start this process at that point. I hate to break it to everybody. But when he says that, find out what that guy's thing is, that's the flaw, and find out if it matters or not, right? I feel like the conversation we're having about Logan Brown, where it's just those guys go undrafted for a reason. If you dig into the why, find out if it's one of those things that's going to prevent him from being able to maximize those tools, or if it's something that just, is something you can either develop or live with, or is acceptable from especially a football standpoint, but obviously an off-field standpoint, that where you can allow him to become the player that we all kind of thought. Anybody who's that high of a recruit coming out of high school, that's the trajectory that you think. And clearly physically he's still there. You're hoping that whatever it is that caused him to come off the board that late is something that is, again, workable, right?
Who knows? Yeah, but the tape, that's all I'm here to do is evaluate. I think
right, exactly. That's the thing that people we do our best, and it was just so much information we will never have at our disposal. And again, even guys that would be I had this guy high on my board, and then he goes in the 5th round. Well, we didn't know he failed that physical, or we didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Specific team doctors got in there and found a degenerative knee issue or a back issue or something, and again, off-field stuff is kind of the same way, where there's only so much information that's able to be obtained, that's why people can come off the board late. It's funny you end there with Logan Brown, because I told you off the air, we finish every interview with the random player from draft history, right? Where I just throw somebody out there. And this is a guy who was number 1 recruit in high school coming out. I think overall, I think ESPN's top 300 or whatever, I think he was the number 1 recruit, and up until his draft, he was maybe going to number 1 overall, if not for the top quarterback. And it was definitely in that conversation, but then he has a knee injury, had to have offseason surgery. And it felt like Daquan Bowers just disappeared from
degenerative knee. That was
from
one of
the
first
psyche
guys
issue,
I remember.
Again, degenerative knee issue, right? And so obviously as a Bucs guy, I remember that experience going from I think they took him 51st overall. Finally, it was halfway through the 2nd round, and they finally were well, we're going to take a shot on the guy that up until a couple months ago was going to go like top 3. And so we'll see whatever he's got. Obviously that didn't happen that way. He spent 5 years in Tampa Bay and didn't play in the NFL after that. He only had 7 sacks, started a handful of games, but obviously was never able to recapture that. But that's what these segments are all about. It's like, oh yeah, that guy who like was a top 3 NFL draft pick until we found out this one thing that like, does it matter or does it not? It obviously ended up mattering a great deal, and he wasn't able to overcome that. But dude, what an odd road from being a number 1 recruit, from being like such a dominant pass rusher when he was healthy at Clemson, and coming out of that season going to be like, man, he's going to be a top 5 lock, ends up falling to the middle of the 2nd round and just never is able to be that player again.
Well, you remember when Trent Baalke was with the 49ers and he thought he had like this market inefficiency was just to draft every guy who was hurt coming out. That was like his strategy for like 3 years. They drafted like Tank Carradine.
That was the guy. I was going to say it was like Dominic Easley came to mind, but I was like, no, it was somebody else. It was
Marcus Lattimore. There was like a few other guys that they just like thought. I mean, Alden Smith was one too, who had an injury coming out.
That's true.
And they drafted, and that one ended up working. But like every year, it seemed like they were drafting the guy who was going to fall for injury reasons, and only one of them ended up.
And they kept finding out why every time.
Yeah, that it's and we always. I feel like the guy that falls for injury issues always becomes one of the steals of the draft, just like as almost by definition, because who was the guy? There's Benjamin Morrison, right? Is one this year where a lot of people like his tape a lot higher than where he went, but no one knows what's going on with his hip, and maybe the Bucs don't even know what's going on with his hip, unfortunately. So, those guys, there's a reason why some teams just avoid it, because if you're starting off your career like that, sometimes, it doesn't work out, unfortunately, in Taquan Bauer's sake.
Yeah. That was it has been interesting, like as a Bucs guy, to follow the whole Benjamin Morrison thing. Cause I think like, it seems like it's like a corrective surgery that he had. Like now that he was injured, they were like, okay, let's go ahead and have the surgery that you were probably going to have at some point. And now you're hurt already. So like, let's go ahead and fix it. Like the team.
So what I was told is that it's like a knee meniscus. It's like your hip version of the knee meniscus.
Okay. Yeah.
So like if you clean it up, you should be good to go. Like it's obviously not ideal, but it's like, and maybe you'll have issues with it. What was it? Dwayne Wade was famously like, he wished he never got his meniscus done because like it maybe cost him some years on the back end of his career, but it's not going to hurt him anytime soon. Right.
Well, it hasn't hurt us at all to have you on the show, Mike. It's been a pleasure to catch up again. Again, I love getting into the sleeper guys, the late round guys. Everybody knows, at this point, the 1st and even 2nd round picks, but it's fun to start to unpack these guys. I think even from a fantasy perspective, I think it's a lot of fun to look at where these guys land and who could emerge here. But man, appreciate your time. Great to catch up. Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can chat football with you, what you're going to be working on over the summer leading into the season.
For sure, yeah. You can find my podcast over on or wherever you get podcasts, but it's on CBS Sports, called Pushing the Pile. And you can find me on X at Mike Renner _. So check me out.
All right, man. Will do. Again, thanks for the time. It was a great conversation, and we'll talk again soon.
For sure, Luke. Thanks for having me out, brother.
Appreciate it. That's going to do it for this week's episode of BPA. Thanks again for joining us. Once again, I'm Luke Easterling for Athlon Sports. We appreciate all the feedback on the podcast, everybody who's subscribed, likes, comments. We again, keep that up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you press that button. If you want to give us feedback, let us know how we're doing. Let us know the types of things you want to see on this show. Again, we always want this to be the show that you want it to be. But yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. Make sure you're locked into athlonsports.com for all of our post-draft coverage, all of our schedule release content that we're going to have up this week. And again, leading into training camp in the offseason, we're going to have so much content as we get ready for the 2025 NFL season. Once again, I'm Luke Easterling with Athlon Sports. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.